And I came to understand that part of their magic, how they pulled off this tremendous bottom-up distribution of wealth without a backlash over decades. And the secret was they'd managed to convince themselves, certainly, but also large swaths of society, that they were not only not the cause of this trouble, but they were in fact the solution, that we could count on them, their goodness, their benevolence through philanthropy, through new things that we'll talk about later, I imagine, like stakeholder capitalism. They will solve our problems if we will just simply give them the power.
Hey, it's Addison Wiggin. I'm just tuning in today to talk about a discussion that I had with Peter Goodman. He is the global economics editor for the New York Times, and he's just written a book called The Davos Man, which I have right here, How the Billionaires Devoured the World. So this is a concept that we've been discussing many times on our show here, most notably with Jim Rickards. I think you'll find out that the conclusions that we come to with Peter are a little bit different than what you might expect. Peter is a good man. I like him, and we had a very good conversation, but I think we probably differ on what role government should play in reining in the billionaires. His book is very eloquent. He's a good writer. It was a good read. I just disagree with some of his conclusions, and you'll see that in the interview. What I would like you to do is just pay attention and listen to what Peter has to say, and we'll take a look. See you. We covered Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and we've covered like Mark Carney and a lot of the money that's being generated to address climate change, and they're impacting financial markets right now. So we've talked a lot about that. But right now, what we're going to talk about is The Davos Man, written by Peter Goodman, who is a writer for New York Times. And I think I would like to get started just by saying welcome, Peter. Thank you for enjoying our Wiggin Sessions. But then I also want to ask you why you got on this topic. I know that you're the global economic editor for the New York Times, but like there has to be a personal reason why you're interested in this. So let's go.
Sure. I mean, I was living in London. I moved to London for the Times in 2016, and I was just in time to cover Brexit, and I covered Trump's arrival on the international stage and his threat to blow up the liberal economic order. And I watched this shift to extremes across much of Europe. I mean, I watched Italy embrace right-wing populist movements. I even saw Sweden, the supposed bastion of social democracy, embrace and elevate a fringe party that had its roots in the neo-Nazi movement. And they turned them into the third most popular party in the country. And I started to get really interested in what is driving these tremendous shifts, what, for lack of a better term, we call populism, right-wing populism. What's propelling this? And the commonality that I came to see in each of these cases, and I did reporting in all of these places, is this pillaging by the global elite, by the billionaire class, this removal of economic opportunities from most of us, with the proceeds transferred to themselves in a process. This is not some sort of puppeteer conspiracy. Process that was gradual and visible, but happened over decades, so that it might as well have been invisible, almost like climate change. And eventually we reach a point where huge numbers of people in all of these countries, and in other countries I haven't mentioned, conclude quite legitimately that their economic needs, their ability to save for their children's college education, to simply put groceries on the table, none of that matters very much to the people running economic policy in their countries. We don't know how that story is going to play out, but it's not going to play out well. And it certainly has opened the door for extremist populist movements that diagnose very real problems in our societies while then prescribing cockamamie supposed solutions that often make the situation worse. And I saw that this was the pattern. And I had spent a lot of time at Davos at the World Economic Forum, this annual gathering of the world's most powerful people, the billionaires, heads of state, the odd celebrity. And I came to see it as a very important access point, an important sort of window onto the thinking of the billionaire class. And I came to understand that part of their magic, how they pulled off this tremendous bottom-up distribution of wealth without a backlash over decades. And the secret was they'd managed to convince themselves, certainly, but also large swaths of society, that they were not only not the cause of this trouble, but they were in fact the solution, that we could count on them, their goodness, their benevolence through philanthropy, through new things that we'll talk about later, I imagine, like stakeholder capitalism. They will solve our problems if we will just simply give them the power. They're the good guys. So the more money they have, the more good they can do. And I came to see before the pandemic that was a really important story. And then the pandemic happened. And for a while, it seemed like nobody cared about anything else. And then I came to see that the pandemic actually was making the world more the way it had already been, and was revealing more than ever the power of the billionaire class to insulate itself from a global disaster and, in fact, to profit off of it.
Okay, so let's get started right there. Is that a bad thing?
Is it bad that the billionaires have ended up with most of the money and the rest of us have seen our healthcare degraded and our ability to work for a living and support our families? Yeah, that's a bad thing. I mean, how are we supposed to solve any problems at all if ordinary people are looking at the top and seeing that nobody's sacrificing? I mean, if we have large scale tax avoidance / evasion conducted by the wealthiest people on earth, we have crumbling infrastructure, we have healthcare systems that are overrun, even before the pandemic, we have a situation where basic goods like education are just simply unaffordable to large numbers of people. We're going to have a lot of angry people. And if you have a lot of angry people, it's pretty hard to tackle issues like climate change, national security, to have rational immigration policies. We just simply can't have a rational conversation about almost anything because so many people, quite justifiably, have suspicion that they don't really have a seat at the table.
Yeah, so it leads to the idea that we would probably have to have policies that rectify those situations. And I feel like we're on the same page here when we say the policies make things worse. and so what do we do?
Well, what we do is what we've done in the past. We stared down in the United States the robber barons when they built up monopolies and undermined labor and basically gobbled up all the spoils of a very successful form of capitalism for themselves and didn't leave enough for anyone else for it to be sustainable. And we constructed social safety nets. We imposed progressive taxation that we used to finance infrastructure, not just roads and highways, but education. And we gave people the skills they needed to then participate and get their piece of the action, in this successful form of capitalism. So we need to expand labor rights so that workers can collectively bargain, so they can get a slice of the bounty. We need to get back to enforcing antitrust law. I mean, that's a relic in the U.S. We pretend that we have free market capitalism. I mean, Davos, man, and that's how I refer to the billionaire class in my book. They've managed to insulate themselves against any source of enforcement by arguing that, when the government gets involved in markets at all, that might as well be, Venezuelan style socialism. I mean, we just need to get over this kind of nonsense and get back to having a democracy where the vast majority of people have a say over where the money's going, and to construct what they want for themselves. And that's very consistently healthcare, education, infrastructure. We need to get back to what we had in the years after World War II.
So what years were those? Like 50s through like 19?
45 to the late 70s in the
Yeah.
US. And,
Until
let me just pause and say, I don't have some sort of fetish for going back to the 60s, right? We don't want Jim Crow laws. The Vietnam War was a disaster. We made a lot of social progress that we want to hang on to. But 45 to the late 70s, pretty much every part of our economy benefited. The old cliche, rising tide lifts all boats. That was true. And that was true because we had much more powerful labor unions, and we had antitrust enforcement, and we had progressive taxation. So there were some things that the markets weren't going to deliver, and the government delivered them. And the things that the markets could deliver, we had a very vibrant private sector, as we ought to have. And that was a pretty successful model. We've let the billionaires essentially buy our democracy and use our democracy as a weapon to then distribute most of the gains of our economy to themselves. And we got to undo that.
Yeah, I'm wondering why that's a bad thing, though, because you have like George Soros on one side who's trying to buy democracy for one thing, and then you have like Elon Musk on the other side. My question to you would be something much more simple, like, what are you trying to solve by asking those questions? Because those guys are going to do what they do, and they're going to manipulate the system. You have like Pelosi and I don't know, Mnuchin, like you have a bunch of people that are playing that game. But
well, what game are you talking about?
No, like infecting or not affecting the political process so that money goes where they want it to go. That's what I'm asking. That's the question I'm asking is like, I feel like you and we're writers, we're trying to figure out what's going on, like we can figure that out. But what are they up to? Like, what are the billionaires?
Well,
like,
let me, this is a good moment to say
billionaires are fucking up the world.
Yeah, my book actually, this may come as a surprise, doesn't demonize billionaires. It demonizes the absurd idea that we should entrust billionaires to solve all of our problems. I don't have any beef with Jeff Bezos, as one of the 5 characters in my book, being insanely rich. I mean, Jeff Bezos had an idea early on to build this, everything store, this tremendous e-commerce business. He did it incredibly well. He executed on his plan, which is not something that just anybody could have done. And he's brought us unbelievable convenience. It's hard to imagine surviving the pandemic without
him, right?
E-commerce.
Yeah.
My beef is with the assumption that therefore Jeff Bezos should get to not pay any taxes. I mean, Jeff Bezos's e-commerce empire rests on infrastructure that we, the public, constructed. We invented the internet. I mean, that comes out of defense spending combined with large research institutions. We've trained legions of programmers who've helped him. We've built and we maintain the highway system that allows all these trucks to drive around delivering Amazon packages. And we need something back. And if we live in a world where we just accept this false binary that Davos men like Jeff Bezos inflict on us, that we can either have the convenience of Amazon and, the miracle of COVID vaccines and central air conditioning and lots of things we like, plus all the inequality we've got, or we can monkey around with that. And then we're, going to lose everything. We're going to be diving into dumpsters for our dinner. Well, we've lost. There's no reason why we can't have the innovation that Bezos gives us. And he gets a big share of the gains, and he can live on yachts and multiple residences. That's all good, but he ought to be paying taxes. So you've asked concretely, what do I think should happen? I think we have to have wealth taxes. I mean, Jeff Bezos earns $83,000 a year. That's his Amazon salary. He's paid about what a California public school teacher earns. So if we only have income taxes, then the people who have most of the money tied up in their stock portfolios are paying a lot less to the government than the people who are scrubbing the toilets in their multiple residences. And that's not only is that unfair? I mean, it is grossly unfair, and it's a source of tremendous outrage and tremendous cynicism that makes it hard to run a democracy, to run anything really. But it also starves the government of resources that it needs to do things that most of us, if we put aside all of the politics that are so toxic now, most of us actually want. I mean, is it controversial whether there ought to be modern highways in America? Is it controversial that airports ought to be, as good as the ones that are all over East Asia? Is it controversial that people should be able to afford to go to college if they've worked hard enough to get into a good college? And yet, these are, I mean, where it gets controversial is when we get into healthcare, where this is so politicized, and yet the polls show pretty clearly, like, most Americans want some form of a single payer healthcare system. We all understand that we're living in a country where we're spending way more on healthcare than any other developed country on earth, and we're not getting benefits. And where's the extra money going? It's going into the coffers of private equity magnates like Steve Schwarzman, who's another one of my 5 characters, who's the world's largest private equity guy, who's worth about $35 billion, who was the bleeding edge of private equity getting hold of our healthcare system in the run up to the pandemic. This partially explains why the world's most powerful country doesn't have enough hospital rooms in the middle of a pandemic. Well, it turns out we cut a third of them in the 2 decades before the pandemic, because when you have profit-making investors running healthcare, they're going to run it the same way, commercial airlines run it. That commercial airlines don't want empty seats. They want every seat full so they can make us agitated, and gives them pricing power, and they can charge us more for everything. And if you're Steve Schwarzman and you're invested in healthcare, you want hospital rooms full. You want people confused about who's paying for what. So they're just signing on the dotted line to get care. And again, I'm not demonizing Schwarzman, who's pretty good at generating a return for his investors. I'm saying we got to get out of the mindset of thinking that if we just give these guys absolute freedom to hire lobbyists by the hundred and rewrite our tax codes and eliminate antitrust enforcement, that somehow, as they would have us believe, we're all going to win. We're just not. They're going to win.
Do you think that that's what they're actually doing? They're just going after their own return. So in a way, they're not even thinking about the public good in any way. And
right.
My question to you would be something like this: like, as a writer, like, what do you care?
What do I care?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a human being. I breathe air.
That's a good answer.
I'd like for it not to be full of toxins, because we've deregulated everything toward the benefit of the Davos men who can afford to completely defenestrate our regulatory apparatus. I'm a dad. I'd like public schools to be decent. I'd like there to be nice fields for my kids to play on, and libraries for them to go get their books. I'd like them to grow up in a world where we don't all, drown in coastal floods. And that's going to involve having to figure out who's going to sacrifice so we can change our economy, so we can deal with climate change. I mean, how do we say to a coal miner in West Virginia, hey, sorry, pal, you can't do what you're doing anymore. You're just going to have to give that up and give up the way that you've supported your family. When that coal miner can say, well, nobody's going to do anything for me. I mean, people aren't paying their taxes in the United States. We have the absolute minimal level of social services. I mean, here's a stat that comes out of my book. Like in Denmark, another social democracy, family of 4, the breadwinner loses their job. 6 months later, they're living on 87% of their previous income, because they get help with housing if they need it. Their healthcare is not connected to their employment.
Is that viable in the U.S. though? I mean, can you do that?
I mean, you can do that if we get back to actually taxing wealthy people. Yeah, sure. I mean, why should we accept this absurd notion that the Davos man have insinuated into our discourse, that we somehow can't afford all the things that every other developed democracy manages to afford? I mean, just to finish that stat, in the U.S., the counterpart number is 28%. So that coal miner in West Virginia understands something real. which is if I lose this job, I got nothing. Nobody's going to help me with my mortgage or my rent. Nobody's going to train me for something new. Nobody's going to help my kids with getting into college. I may lose healthcare. So we're in a position where we're actually less innovative, less resilient than countries where they tax rich people and finance social services.
So is that what you're advocating? I'm just trying to understand, because there's two sort of issues here. Davos man are the billionaires that wreck the world, right? That's part of your book. But the other thing is tax policy and trying to figure out how to finance social services.
It's not just social services. I mean,
separate things, or in your mind, is that the same thing?
It's the same thing. I mean, essentially, we've lived through a half century where we have dismantled every conceivable kind of public infrastructure, whether it's healthcare, education, funding for roads, public health, and we have transferred the proceeds to the richest people in the world. And that's not by accident. That is the triumph of their lobbying, of their campaign contributions, of putting people into positions of power where they are doing the bidding of the donor class. And we've got to get back to running a democracy where the needs of the people who live in the country are at the center of the conversation, instead of politicians catering to people who write campaign checks.
Isn't that kind of a populist argument, though? Like, we got to get back to the people. That's, to me, that's a progressive and populist argument. That,
if you want to call it that, I don't have a beef with that. I mean, it's not nationalist right-wing populism. It's real populism.
The difference between the two.
Well, right-wing populism seems to go hand in hand with authoritarianism and an actual tearing down of democratic institutions. And it caters to this idea that when we dismantle government, we are solving the people's problems, which is just a sheer fallacy. I mean, we've lived through an open air experiment in that idea, and the result is desperation.
So what happens? I mean, how do we get from, I mean, you're talking about populism derived from government policy, that kind of thing, to make sure that people are taken care of. And then the right-wing version is what you're describing as we just tear it all down. So how do we get to the place where people are confident that they can live a good life? And I have this same question because I have kids and I have a family and I have property and I want things to work well. So like, what is your version of how that all fits together?
I mean, I think we got to strip the money out of politics, and then we need to.
I would agree with that, like, wholeheartedly, but that, I mean, politics is all about money.
Well, it is now. I mean, that's something that the people have allowed to happen to their democracy.
Yeah.
Look, it's what we need to do is simple. The doing of that thing or those things is not simple at all, because Davos man is not going to unilaterally disarm, and Davos man has got, a hell of an apparatus through social media, through public relations, to sell us on this idea that he's looking after our interests. But ultimately, we've got to have stronger labor rights, stronger antitrust enforcement, and progressive taxation. I mean, if we had those three things, we could solve a lot of problems.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to the kind of like conclusion of your book. So you analyzed the conundrum that we're in, right? And then you give solutions at the end. So what are they? So how do we get to the end?
I mean, we've been talking about them. Wealth taxes, that's key. We've got to have a tax system that actually gets at the places where inequality resides, and that's wealth. It's not income, it's wealth. We need to have.
What's wrong? Like you've already touched on this. There's nothing wrong with wealth. It's like the distribution of wealth is what you're talking about.
Wealth is derived from public goods on some level. I mean, nobody built $1 billion all by themselves. What's that?
That's what Bill Gates says as well. But then he takes his wealth and he does whatever. Like he sets up, I don't know. The last I heard, he was investing in restaurants in the Netherlands. Like wealth is wealth. We're not going to distribute it in any other way than the people who have it choose to do it.
Well, I mean, are you an anarchist? I mean, do you believe in
I'm not an anarchist, but I just believe that people should choose to do what they want with their own wealth. And that just creates a lot of problems.
But we live in a society.
Yeah.
I mean, do you drive on your own private road? When you turn on the tap water, is that drawing water from some source that you are wholly in control of on your private land?
All right, Peter, listen to me. I am a very reasonable person, and I go along with the laws of my community, and I understand that we have to work together. But at the same time, there's like massive wealth. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this. There's like massive wealth,
right,
that is changing the way that we think about things. And I'm trying to get to the point of what you think should be done. I don't think wealth taxes are going to do it. Do you think wealth taxes are going to change anything?
Well, how do you think we should deal with inequality? Or do you think inequality is not a problem?
I guess I don't think that inequality is a problem that needs to be dealt with policy, because I feel like every time the government gets involved, then we make our issues worse. Because mostly the people that are involved in we're in a primary season here in right now, and they're just promoting themselves. Like I have this idea of the narcissism of politicians, where they're not actually solving anything. They're just promoting themselves.
So when it snows in Baltimore, do you go out and plow the streets that you need to plow to get where you want to go?
Yep.
You plow your own streets?
Yep.
And
it doesn't happen very often. So.
And when it's time to get rid of the trash, do you
No, I believe in civic. I believe in society, and I believe in civic duty. Like I'm not really opposed to any of that, but I feel like the people who make policy are they just go too far.
Well, okay. I mean, government, like every institution, is flawed, can be abused, gives way to corruption. There are incompetent people in every line of work. And sure enough, there are incompetent and corrupt people in government. But if we go from there to say, well, the hell with it, we might as well just not have government. And therefore, we don't need taxes. And I mean, first of all, you talked about Cambodia before we jumped on. We may as well go back to the Khmer Rouge version of year zero, because everything that happened before that delivered us to this moment in time where some people have so much more than others, well, that's just happenstance. I mean, I guess history is just irrelevant then. That's just sort of like God's plan or something. The things got to pour. I mean, come on. I mean, it's nonsense. Like, nobody makes $1 billion without availing themselves of some public goods. And we live in a society where public goods have to be paid for. And the way we pay for public goods is taxation. So if you're going to advocate no taxation, then you're going to advocate, then you're condemning society, and then we may as well just dismantle everything, and we can run around, with our AR-15s and try to steal what's left of our gasoline.
That seems like where we're going, right?
And how does that feel? Do we like that? We want to lean into that?
I don't like it.
Right. So what's the solution to that? The solution's got to be democracy, and whether we like it or not. I mean, we got a couple of alternatives.
So let me just do one thing, because I don't think we live in a democracy, and I just want to get your your point on this, because I feel like we're arguing, but I don't think we're actually arguing. But there's a difference between democracy and a republic.
Sure.
So let me just get your take on that, because I think what I would like to do is get back to the Davos man and how they're the people who are doing what they're doing are extra republic, if I could say that correctly.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Beyond what we believe our situation is.
Well, first of all, we live in a flawed democracy that's under assault by people who are warping our democracy for their own ends. And it's a very fragile moment where, voting rights are under assault. Facts themselves have been devalued by organized propaganda campaigns. And every time we have an argument over facts, Davos man wins, because the status quo is one in which wealth continues to flow into a smaller and smaller set of hands. So we got to understand that right off the bat.
Yeah. So what if we just said that was okay?
That what was okay?
That the wealth flows into a smaller. I'm playing the devil's advocate right now.
Sure.
So I'm not.
Yeah. Look, if you think the status quo is okay, then fine. But then you're accepting that we have a situation where we have homeless people camped under every overpass in sight in many cities of the United States, on sidewalks in places like San Francisco and Portland, Oregon, huge encampments where huge numbers of people declare bankruptcy because they have medical bills they can't pay, where something like 40% of the country is a $500 bill away from real financial ruin, according to the Fed. I mean, we have people who, if their car breaks down and they can't get to work, they're not that far away from homelessness. And we're in a situation where our public health system completely failed in the midst of the worst pandemic in a century, and fails on a daily basis, even in the richest, most powerful country on earth. So if you think all that's okay, then yeah, what's the problem with inequality? I mean, it's great for Elon Musk. It's great for Jeff Bezos. We all enjoy, the billionaire porn.
Yeah, I was walking down the street with my dog yesterday, and I ran into this woman, and she had a dog of her own, and I'm like, hey, can they say hi? And the dog's name was Tessa, and I'm like, Tesla?
Huh.
And she's like, no, I hate Elon Musk.
Huh.
And I'm like, who hates Elon Musk? Like, how does that happen?
How do people end up hating Elon Musk? Well, that's a whole separate
the
conversation.
person that I met on the street with her dog. Yeah. How does that happen?
I mean, I think the word is out that Elon Musk doesn't believe in paying taxes, and Elon Musk thinks that a free-for-all in social media where people can basically say whatever they want, regardless of the consequences, is just fine. And has carved out this bizarre kind of free speech edict where people attacking other people's free speech is somehow sacred. And we know, I mean, look, I'm no Elon Musk expert. I don't even know where we're talking about Elon Musk, but I think the word is out that the billionaires do not have the public interest at heart. And that's fine. I'm not my book doesn't advocate that we should figure out how to set up a world where the billionaires are going to fix our problems. My book argues that we should get back to regulating billionaires and having a say over how they're going to pay back society for the tremendous fortunes that they built, so we can construct the kind of country that most people actually want, according to all polling. People actually want a democracy in which they can assume they can go out and get a job that will pay their bills and where they can send their kids to college and not worry about healthcare.
So, all right, let's go back to the genesis of your book.
Sure.
So you're a writer and you're a thinker and very deep thinker.
So they say. Yeah.
Well, so what happened? Like, how do you put together a book like this?
How do I put together a book like this?
Well, I'm selling your book, so
I appreciate it.
But I'm just saying, like, how do you get there?
How do I get to a place where I write this book?
Yeah.
So, I was working as the European economic correspondent for the Times, and I was writing about Brexit, and I was writing about Trump's trade war, and I was writing about Italy's lurch to the extreme right and the rise of the yellow vest movement in France, and all the while going to Davos. And I kept realizing that at places like the World Economic Forum, where the billionaires gather to do their deals and to kind of virtue signal by dint of being there at a place where they have these seminars on climate change and gender equality and racial injustice, I kept surveying their supposed solutions to the inequality crisis that was clearly driving this attack on the liberal democratic order. And their solutions always involved, workers training themselves. Or, I heard Ray Dalio one year say that we needed to deregulate more to unleash the animal spirits of the market, to create a more conducive climate of money making, which was an interesting thing to hear from somebody who somehow managed to build a fortune worth $18 billion. There's some sort of dearth of money making economic opportunities. And they said everything except for, we need to actually sacrifice some of our wealth so that the vast majority of people don't have enough of it. Get some of it through things like progressive taxation. And then I got very interested in the functioning of the forum itself, this kind of high-minded official agenda for those in favor of globalization and technology and supposedly enlightened ways of thinking about modern day problems. And I started to see that, first of all, the forum functions as a kind of prophylactic against taxation and deregulation. So the genius of Klaus Schwab, who I know you've talked about, is the founder of the World Economic Forum, in convening this event that, unlike, say, the Forbes or the Fortune summits, which are, essentially about business people getting together to figure out how to make more money, Schwab convenes the forum under the banner of committed to improving the state of the world, which is, a kind of hilarious phrase when you're gathering the people who are, by any objective measure, the ultimate beneficiaries of the status quo. And he's managed to market it as this event where simply by being there, you've demonstrated your dedication to solving the problems of the day. And it becomes a kind of rallying point for Davos men to sell us on the idea that they have the social good at heart.
And do you believe that it's true?
Do I believe what's true?
That they have social good at heart?
No, of course not. No, I mean, they have their shareholders' interests at heart. And frankly, that's their job. I don't begrudge them that at all.
There's stakeholders and there's shareholders. Let's talk about that a little bit. And if you could describe the difference between the two, that would be helpful for me, because I'm going to be writing about that in the weeks ahead. So what's the difference? Like, who cares?
Well, it depends upon whose belief system you're buying into. I mean, if you listen to people like Schwab or Mark Benioff, who's another one of my five characters. He's the founder of Salesforce, this big Silicon Valley software company, or Larry Fink, who's the world's largest asset manager, who until the market meltdown of the last couple of months was managing $10 trillion worth of wealth.
11.
Yeah, now it's down, I think, to 8.6, but that's still a hell of a lot of money. If you believe them, they'll tell you, once upon a time, we lived in Milton Friedman's world where companies were just supposed to maximize their profits and return those profits to shareholders. And that was magically supposed to maximize the social good. And there's been a huge backlash to that way of thinking because of inequality, because it's just so obvious that the kind of capitalism we've been living in has delivered most of the gains to a handful of people. So they've trotted out this thing they call stakeholder capitalism, which is this idea that instead of just catering to shareholders, businesses are now catering to a range of stakeholders. A shareholder is a stakeholder, but there are others, labor, never labor unions. They're very careful about that, but labor, local communities. Benioff once said, the planet is a stakeholder, which is very reassuring to those of us who live on the planet. It's this nonsensical construction where they pretend that we don't have to regulate, we don't have to tax their gains, we don't have to actually force them to deal with rules or collective bargaining. They will just, through the magic of the market, take care of our problems. And so Fink, has famously written these letters to other executives, arguing that we have to address climate change. And if you don't address climate change as a corporate executive, then the markets will deprive you of capital. And Benioff has told all sorts of stories about how, the way he founded his company was on this kind of vision quest to southern India while he was having an existential crisis, while he was an executive at Oracle. And he embraced this woman known as the Hugging Saint, who said, your purpose in life is to make a ton of money and then give it back through philanthropy. And Benioff says, that's the real function of his company. Well, that's all well and good. Benioff actually has done a fair bit of philanthropy, but his company has not once, but twice in recent years paid the modest sum of $0 in federal taxes. And that's the reveal right there, that all of this.
But why is it important that the companies that again, devil's advocate, I'm just asking, why is it important that these companies pay federal taxes? Like, why?
If they don't pay federal taxes, then we're in a situation. You said earlier, well, doesn't government make everything worse? That the root cause of that thinking is that government has been dysfunctional, and in large part because it's been starved of resources. Governments in our country are so to the bone that they rarely can achieve anything. Benioff at Davos back in 2021 actually said the CEOs are the heroes of the pandemic. He said, not parents dealing with children cooped up at home, dealing with distance learning, not frontline medical workers. He said the CEOs are the heroes of the pandemic. We saved you not for profit, but to save the world. And he said the governments didn't save you, non-governmental organizations didn't save you. It's easy to parse that. He's essentially saying governments can't do anything. I can do something. And he points at the fact that in the first wave of the pandemic, he pulled strings with his associates in China, and he located 50 million pieces of PPE, face masks, gowns, hand sanitizer for frontline medical workers all over the world. Now, I'm willing to believe that doing that probably saved some lives, and we should be grateful for that. We should also ask, why are we dependent upon the largesse of a tech bro to save us from the worst pandemic in a century in the wealthiest country in the world? Well, part of the reason is because his company pays $0 in federal taxes, because we're surrounded by institutions that have been stripped bare as we've essentially liquidated public infrastructure and transferred the proceeds to people like Mark Benioff.
I'm sort of speechless at the moment because I'm a free market guy. And I believe that that corporations can do better than the government.
But what does it mean to be a free market guy? I mean, do you think there's a free market where, absent regulation, there's anything other than monopoly power?
No, I mean, I do believe in the government's like power to be able to break up monopolies. Yes.
I mean, I'm a free market guy. I mean, if the alternative is, top down, Leninist style, China, let the government pick the
You're
winners.
not going to go there.
I mean, I'm a free market guy, but I understand that to have a free market, we need infrastructure, we need education, we need a lot of things that the free market's not going to provide.
And taxes need to contribute.
I mean, you got to pay for it somehow. How are we going to pay for it? Is the Easter Bunny going to give us the money to maintain the highways?
The Easter Bunny is good. I'm not really arguing with you. I do think it's funny, though.
What's funny?
I think it's funny that we spend a lot of time about trying to figure out how to live in a free society, and almost no one agrees with one another. So we spend a lot of time talking about it, but nothing really gets done.
But that's not an accident. That's the whole point of my book.
Yeah.
It's not an accident.
Yeah, I'll take that.
None of this is an accident. And again, that doesn't make it a conspiracy.
No.
And I don't think the World Economic Forum is some sort of like conspiratorial government.
I don't think so either. I think they're trying to do what they think is right. And I just disagree with them a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I come at it from a different approach. I think whether we agree with them or disagree with them is almost irrelevant, because they have no power and they have almost no influence. And their real function is as a kind of Potemkin problem solver, while they're giving cover to what's really going on, which is this systematic pillaging of society.
Yeah, they have a lot of money, though.
Yeah, they have some money. We don't know where it goes. I mean, it's a pretty successful nonprofit run by Schwab through a black box.
All right. So if you could characterize your book in, like, I don't know, maybe if I looked at the liner notes or something, like, how would you, like, what message would you want people to take away from what we
I want people to understand what I just said, that none of what we've experienced has happened by accident, and that there has been this systematic bottom-up transfer of wealth. Again, not that there's some sort of organized group that's trying to engineer that, but the sum total of large companies headed by billionaires lobbying our governments to dismantle our infrastructure while lowering their taxes. The net effect of that is to take from us things that I think most of us think are pretty basic to living in a society, like healthcare, like education, like the prospect that you can make a decent living. And that more than that, they've insinuated into our conversation this completely false dichotomy that we either have to accept the status quo with its tremendous inequality, or we might as well be Bolsheviks, and that there's no ground in the middle. And that's just flatly nonsense. We can have a world where there's technological innovation, where there's economic growth, where there's some inequality, where some people are very wealthy, where we have vaccines and modern healthcare, and we can still tax wealthy people and finance some basic infrastructure that we all want.
I'm going to leave you with the mic drop. Boom.
Okay.
I was going to ask you another question, but I'm not going to do that.
Oh, you can do it if you want. I got time.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's good. I like your book, and I like your perspective. So
thank you very much. I appreciate your airing it out.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'll write about it all next week, and we'll see where it goes.
Love it. Okay.
All right.
I appreciate your interest.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Take care.